Welcome once again, everyone, to Mary's School of Prophecy. I am your host, William Tapley, also known as the Eagle of the Apocalypse and the co-prophet of these end times. And I have another very interesting decode of a Dana Coverstone dream. It is his most recent dream, and he calls it the Fire Tower Dream. But we only have, 19 students in class, and they're down the hallway gabbing, I'm sure. So you know what I thought I would do? I can't believe my throat is acting up. And I don't have my dandy with me. Usually I make some dandy. Dandy blend is good for my throat. In any event, I thought I would do the housekeeping first for a change and wait for the students who are late to get into class. So I will do the housekeeping. This only takes a minute or so. And for those of you who would like to contact me, there's my address. William Tapley, Post Office Box 291, Osage, Iowa, 50461. And we do have an offer at the moment, and that is a free blessed rose petal from Bayside. These are laminated. They're perfect for your wallet. If you send me a self-addressed stamped envelope, I will send you 1, 2, or 3 of these. And if you live outside the country, be sure to use a international stamp. And don't forget, I do offer my book, The Holy Spirit Guide to End Times Prophecy. There are 4 volumes. And if you want to order these, go to my website, thirdeaglemedia.com. I think there's a link below. And click on the newsletter tab. And the July newsletter has an order form, the second page. And if you want to order these right away, go to the donate button and click on the PayPal link. And if you want to read these ahead of time, so you know exactly what you're getting, click on the transcript tab, because all my books are published in their entirety on my website. Do you know anyone else who is offering books and gives them away free like that? I don't think so. Okay, now I think we can head right into Dana Coverstone's dream, because it is a fascinating dream, and it involves me, for example, personally. I think just as a lot of his dreams have. Certainly, it involves our own remnant Catholic Church, and a lot of people have noticed that. It's a prophecy for us, and those of you who are watching, and for me, and I think, well, the best way to put it is I feel kind of a resonance with Dana. Dana is kind of like a watchman on the wall, or in this case, a tower, a fire tower, and I feel the same way myself. And he is reaching out to evangelicals, and I'm reaching out to the remnant Catholic Church. Hopefully, the entire Catholic Church, but the entire Catholic Church is right now under a Vatican that has been taken over, as Mary prophesied at La Salette. She said Rome would lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. Now, this dream of Dana Coverstone's fulfills the requirements of apocalyptic prophecy. It's extremely unusual. I used to think the only apocalyptic prophecy was in the Bible, until I discovered that La Salette was apocalyptic prophecy. Anyway, the symbolic interpretation takes precedence over the literal. Numerology is extremely important. And it takes a co-prophet to understand it. Those are the 3 most important aspects of apocalyptic prophecy. So I think we will start right now, if I can remember how to do this. Be patient, people. As you know, I am not only the moderator of this program, but I am the engineer as well. So let me start out with the very first slide that I have. And Dana Coverstone got this dream between March 22nd and April 13th. And that's 23 days, which is kind of interesting, as if you watch the very first video I did way back in 2008, I explained on there what the number 23 means, and it is another number for the Antichrist, because 2 represents mankind, 3 represents God, and when you put man before God or over God, like in a fraction, you get the decimal point 666. And I don't think that's accidental. In other words, just the fact that the dream lasted over 23 days tells us that this is end times prophecy. Okay, let's look at the first slide I've got. As the dream began, I was standing about 100 feet. By the way, I'm going to put the significant numerology in red in this on the slides. I was standing about 100 feet above the ground at the very top of a fire tower. I could see in all directions, and I could clearly see random fires all around me on the ground below. There were no buildings, no homes, no businesses. It was just forests and fields and lots of green cover below. No mountains, no valleys, just flat ground. And there were a lot of people out there. I've got my slide set up just the opposite of what I wanted. So just a minute while I rearrange my screen so I can better see what I am doing here. You'll have to be patient, everybody. Okay. So it's interesting that this is a unusual place. It's obviously symbolic. I mean, if you have a place where there are lots of people, but there's no buildings, no houses, no businesses, nothing, this is an unusual place. I think we can find out exactly what we're talking about here. And he says there are a lot of people. So where in the Bible do you find a lot of people? Well, there are several places, but in the end times, we find a lot of people in Revelation 7, verses 9 and 16. I'm going to show you these. And I think this is the same group we're talking about. Now, the group in Revelation is in heaven. The group in Dana's dream are on the green landscape with no houses. But I think it's the same group, as we will find. So let's look at the slide I have from Revelation. Just a minute. Revelation 7, verse number 9. After this I saw a great multitude, which no man could number, of all nations and tribes and peoples and tongues, standing before the throne and in sight of the Lamb, clothed with white robes and palms in their hands. And verse 13, and one of the ancients answered and said to me, these that are clothed in white robes, who are they, and whence did they, and whence came they? I am still struggling with this. I should do this. I should do a video at least once a week so that I don't have to try to figure out how to do this every time. Either that or get an engineer. Okay, so now, as I am going to claim that the group that Dana sees from the tower, the large group, and this group in the book of Revelation are the same group, except that the group in Dana's dream show the group before they are taken to heaven. Whereas when they get to heaven, they wear white. They have, I think, palms in the hands. That indicates martyrdom. They suffered death. And we're going to see in Dana's dream what kind of a death they suffer. Okay, let's look at the next slide is from Revelation. Also, we continue describing this group, this large group in Revelation. Chapter 7, verses 14. And I said to him, my Lord, thou knowest. And he said to me, these are they who have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. They shall no more hunger nor thirst. Neither shall sun fall on them, nor any heat. So this place, I claim that this is the same group that Dana sees from the fire tower. The location, I think we can determine by, he calls it a green field and so on. Now green field, green grass, the trees, and so on. And I think this is the same as what the woman flees to in the book of Revelation, where it is called a desert. But there's other ways to interpret the word desert. It can also be interpreted as a wilderness. And I've often mentioned that our refuges could be a cave in the mountains, a cabin in the woods. So the wilderness can be a desert landscape, or in this case, it is a a green landscape, but there are no houses. It sounds so much like a wilderness without no amenities. This is what we are going to have to flee to. We are going to have to find a refuge in the wilderness. I think you'll see that these people in Dana's dream don't find a refuge for the most part. All right, now let me see where I am here. The fact that they, in the book of Revelation, the fact that they no longer have hunger, that indicates that the people in Dana's dream are facing the problems of the black horse that rides. That indicates famine. And the fires that Dana sees, all random, he says they're random, all over the place. He may have suggested that they were hellfires. I don't think they are. I think these are part of the punishment upon mankind. In other words, they are part of the chastisement from God. I think that they are parts of meteors, parts of comets, and so on. And that's what happens in the end time. I think it could possibly be nuclear radiation. Okay, let's look at the next slide I have. The fires were being driven by very strong winds that I could even feel on the top of that tower as I looked down. And I was yelling as loud as I could at people who were just wandering below and walking towards those fire areas. They were walking towards the area where I saw the fires. I had no bullhorn, no microphone, no sound system that I could tell, and I could tell that my voice was strained from yelling. Okay, now the wind's blowing the flames. That would indicate that these fires come from God. That would be the Holy Spirit. When he says he has no bullhorn, no sound system, that means that we have left the internet. This is the great tribulation that these people are in. There's no internet that he can reach them. I mean, right now we have the internet, but at that time, there's probably going to be a different form of communication, I would guess. And as I say, I identify with Dana Coverstone on top of the tower trying to reach people. And the numerology in this, at the beginning here, was it the first? I think it was the first slide I showed you, or was it this slide that I just showed you? Oh, maybe it's the next slide. I did practice this. You may not believe it, but I did go over this more than once. Well, there's the phone. Well, I am not sure. Probably my brother. He watches his granddaughter because she plays at the United States Naval Academy. So I'm not going to answer that. He'll give me a report after this program. Oh yeah, it was in the very first slide. Okay, the very first slide. The height of the tower is 100 feet high, and that indicates to me 2 rosaries. As you know, 50 is the number in the Bible for Mary's rosary. So this person on top of the tower, who was Dana, and I think it also represents me because of the 100 feet high. That would be 2 rosaries. And I have said all along here on this program that you must pray more than just one series of 5 decades. You really need to pray all 4 decades, all 4 mysteries every day. And I think that's what the 100 feet represents. All of these numbers in this dream, which Dana Coverstone received, has significance, and that's typical of apocalyptic prophecy. Now, where am I up to here? I'll get there, people. Just a minute. Okay, now the people in the book of Revelation, they no longer have to worry about hunger, and they don't have to worry about heat and the sun falling on them. Well, I think that is what we're talking about here. Those are the fires that Dana sees, and they're not hellfires. They are, let me see. There could be nuclear radiation. I guess I mentioned that. Okay. Oh, just a minute. This is hard to juggle. I'm juggling, 3 images here. Okay, let's go to the next slide. I just showed you, I think, slide number 2, right? Yes. Let's look at slide number 3. I was telling people to walk in a direction away from the fires. And I was saying north and south, or east or west. And I said, hey, go to the left. Go to your left. Hey, you in the blue baseball cap. Hey, you in the yellow jacket. You can go left. There's fire ahead. But even though I gave them clear directions, nobody was listening. I kept screaming, and I was screaming very, very loud. I could feel the raspiness in my voice, almost getting hoarse. I was screaming. I was clapping my hands, trying to get their attention. Now, there's another indication that I think that this person not only indicates Dana reaching his congregation, but me reaching my remnant Catholic Church because of the hoarseness. And as you know, I do have, as we see on this program, I have a hoarseness. If I had my dandy blend, I could sip on it. That would help. And if you pray the rosary with me every morning at 10 a.m., you know I have this problem. It's probably because I'm getting old, but nonetheless, the fact that Dana mentions his hoarseness and the raspiness of his voice, I think, points to me. Okay, let's look at the next slide I have here set up. And continuing with Dana's dream, I even had a piece of wood I was beating on the metal frame in front of me, where I stood looking down at the ground. I was beating a piece of wood against that, trying to make noise, doing anything I could to get the attention of those on the floor of the canopy below me. But nonetheless, no one was listening. I kept yelling at a group of people that finally looked up at me and said to stop yelling at them. I kept saying, I'm trying to save your life, so don't keep going in that direction. You're going or you're going to end up in the fire. And they just looked up and they just kind of looked back down and kept going. I think Dana does a good job of warning his congregation. If you watch his video, he is very passionate. My sister watched it. She told me that you can see he's very sincere. And my approach is obviously quite a bit different. I don't have that enthusiasm. Well, of course, he's a lot younger than I am. But I have a more intellectual approach in analyzing what the prophecy is all about. And that's why not only had Dana's congregation better start listening, but the remnant Catholic Church had better start listening also. Okay, let's look at the next slide. Suddenly, after this group of people responded to me, what appeared to be a group of soldiers came out of the forest. And they were armed with weapons, but they were all wearing green camo. It looked like the kind of camouflage you go hunting in. It reminded me of the 70s and 80s, the early style of camouflage. It looked kind of cheap, kind of cheesy. It wasn't professional. It wasn't military grade by any means. And these people started telling the people to ignore my yelling, as there were no fires in that area at all. So now we have some more numerology. In the 70s and the 80s. And I was trying to figure out what that would refer to. At first I thought, well, you add the two numbers together, that would be 150. That's a rosary number, but that's not pertinent here because these people are trying to subvert Dana Coverstone. It's yelling from the top of the tower. And I said, I wonder if that has to do with the 1970s and the 1980s, which is what Dana says it does. And the Pope in the 1970s was Pope Paul VI. The Pope in the 1980s was Pope John Paul II. What's interesting is that those two popes, plus the Pope between, which would be Pope John Paul I, they ignored the prophecies of Sister Lucy at Fatima. Just like Dana says that these soldiers telling the people to ignore the prophecy, the popes in those decades ignored the very important prophecy of Fatima that they were supposed to consecrate Russia to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. I think that is the reference here. In fact, it got so bad that the Vatican somehow got rid of Sister Lucy, and nobody knows how. Nobody knows the fate of the real Sister Lucy. And they installed an imposter in her place. And it's so obvious. All you have to do is to look at the photographs. And I have some photographs here I want to show you. And I got these off the internet today. So on the left, you have the real Sister Lucy, who received the prophecy from Mary at Fatima. And on the right, you see the imposter, who was wearing lipstick, by the way. The real Sister Lucy would never wear real lipstick. Now here's another picture of the two Lucys. The Vatican tries to tell us that the imposter on the right is the same person as Sister Lucy on the left. Well, it doesn't take too much to see those are not the same person. And there is photographic evidence like this all over the internet. It's amazing that nobody's called out the Vatican on this. And here's the most obvious comparison. Sister Lucy on the left, you can see the profile. It's not too clear, but notice how her chin is receding. She has a receding chin. Whereas the imposter Lucy on the right has a prominent chin, chin that juts out. Just the opposite. How in the world did the Vatican get away with this fraud? How can they get away with fooling people like that? All right, now let's look at. We looked at all the pictures of the imposters. So now I want to look at the next slide I've got from Dana's dream. I could tell they were not truly soldiers, but could not tell what they were affiliated with. But they had military equipment and obviously had background in it. The pretend soldiers then started yelling at me to stop harassing people. As they did this, some of the younger ones in the some of the younger ones in the people crowd began throwing rocks at the tower that I was standing on and yelling at me to stop screaming at them. I then yelled that they were walking towards the fire and that they were at risk of dying. Now, I think Dana believes that these soldiers, the military soldiers, represent clergy. I think he's right on that. In fact, for the Catholic Church, they would represent the hierarchy, and I think they do. And I mentioned already Pope Paul VI and Pope John Paul II. They refused to release the Vatican, the third secret. And somebody in the Vatican, I don't know, nobody knows what they did with Sister Lucy, the real Sister Lucy. They installed the imposter. And so when Dana Coverstone says that they are pretend soldiers, I think that's a damning evidence of the type of clergy, type of hierarchy we have right at the moment. Okay, let's look at my next slide. At this time, one of the soldiers, that would be the hierarchy, started shooting at the bottom of the platform that I was standing on. And he yelled to the crowd that there was no fire. They should just continue on in the direction they'd been going. When I yelled that they were lying and that I could see the fire ahead of them, they shot the bottom of the platform that I was standing on again. They didn't pay any attention to me after that. The people continued walking toward the fire just like they were blind. Well, I have the exact same feeling that Dana Coverstone has. The Catholic Church, any of them listening to my co-prophecies? Well, this video won't get 1/10 the views that Dana Coverstone's video gets, but that's, I mean, that since he's the prophet, I can understand that. But the people who watch his videos are not going to understand them because Dana doesn't understand them. Not that that's anything bad on his part. The prophet Daniel did not understand his dreams. Daniel's dreams were for the end times, and apocalyptic prophecy must be interpreted. That's one of the characteristics of apocalyptic prophecy. And this reminds me of what Jesus said: a prophet is not without honor except in his own country. Did I quote that right? A prophet is not without honor except in his own country. I guess I got that right. In other words, I guess this is nothing new. But it's what's, I think, kind of frightening is that it's the clergy, and that is the hierarchy. The military are the ones who are trying to shoot down the true prophets. And is that what happened to Sister Lucy? Some people say she was murdered. We know Pope John Paul I was murdered. That was revealed. Not that the Vatican has ever admitted that. Well, anyway, there is a campaign on now in YouTube and on the internet to get to the bottom of Sister Lucy's disappearance and the installing of the imposter, Sister Lucy. Okay, let's look at the next slide. Well, one young teenager, this would be another number, began wiping his arms, kind of like, oh, he could feel the heat coming. He said he was getting hot. Maybe they should listen to the guy on the tower. One large adult came to the teen and pushed him very hard so the kid sprawled on the ground. He told the teen, shut up or you're not coming with us. And the teen watched the crowd go, and he did not get up off the ground. Okay, so it's interesting that there's one teenager, in other words, a real small minority who listens to the prophecy, and there's one adult who counters him. I wonder if the one adult would be like Pope Francis. It's interesting that a teen understands the prophecy. If you look at Mary's appearances, Mary is the greatest prophet of the end times, by the way. If you look at her appearances at La Salette, at Fatima, at Lourdes, Garabandal, Medjugorje, she always appears to teenagers, usually shepherds. I wonder if maybe this teen symbolizes the age group that can accept prophecy. Maybe I should focus my attention on teens, because maybe that's what Dana is letting us know, the Holy Spirit through Dana. Okay, let me look at the next slide. Within seconds, the people in the crowd that were walking towards the fire burst into flames, and they were screaming in agony and pain, and they were running back towards the young man. They were begging him to put the fire out, but he ran from them in the opposite direction and didn't even try to help them. Seeing the young man run away, I began telling him to head to his left for about 50 feet and to wait for a fire break. Soldiers began yelling for the kid to head back the way he'd come, but he refused and he kept running, ducking every few feet as they were firing at him. Now, let me find my scene. Every time I hear that phone, I figure there's something wrong with my broadcast, like the sound isn't coming through or something. But I guess it's all right. I know it's my brother trying to tell me how great his granddaughter is doing. Okay, so now in this section, the number 50 is obvious symbolism, and we know that represents Mary's rosary. We know it from the book of Esther. But because the scaffold that the king hangs Haman on, who represents the Antichrist, is 50 cubits high. That would be 75 feet. Do you realize how high that is? It's obviously a symbolic number. And it's the same symbolism here. The 50 feet that the kid is directed by Dana to run off to represents Mary's rosary. That's how the kid is going to be saved, through the rosary. It's in other words, there are 50 Hail Marys in a 5-decade mystery. And most of the people in this crowd are going to be burned with fire, even though they represent the church, even though they are in the wilderness. They're in the wilderness because they undoubtedly refuse to take the mark of the beast. So these are good people. They're in the church. They follow the hierarchy. They're faithful as far as that goes. But they don't realize that the camouflage soldiers, that's from the 70s and 80s. That's not going to protect them anymore. They've got to listen to the prophets that have been assigned to them. As St. Paul says, do not despise prophecy. Your life depends on it. And we see that not only with Dana's ministry, but my own ministry. So the one who is saved, only one, is saved because he takes up Mary's rosary, which is one of the two wings on the eagle that the woman flies into the desert on. The two wings of the eagle represent Mary's rosary and scapular. And as I say, the desert and the wilderness, they represent the same thing. Okay, let's look at my next slide. After he got away, the soldiers began circling the fire tower, and they grabbed large sticks, and they set the ends on fire like torches. But the tower was made of steel, and it would not burn. One of them whistled very loudly, and I heard large trucks coming through the canopy, and there were two 18-wheelers coming slowly up to the two corners of the tower. They had open trailers that were full of metal and gasoline, and you could smell the gas coming off. It was just pieces of metal in a pool of gasoline, like in the back of a semi-trailer with the top cut off. Okay, I'm sure you and my regular audience understand this numerology. 2, as I said before, is the number of mankind. 18, the 18-wheelers. 18 is another number for the Antichrist. 6 plus 6 plus 6. These are the people who are that's the forces of the Antichrist within the church who are now going to attack the tower that the prophet is on. And we know the Antichrist will be in the church because of Mary's prophecy at La Salette. 2, a couple of teenagers, Melanie Cavat, Maximum Giraud. Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. And as Pope Paul VI said, the smoke of Satan has entered into the Catholic Church. So these 18-wheelers, that's what they symbolize. This prophecy is not just for Dana and his evangelical congregation. It's also for our own remnant Catholic Church. Let's look at the next slide I've got here, ready to go, I think. At this moment, I prayed and asked God for help, and I looked out across the sky. It was then that I saw not hundreds, but thousands of the tops of other fire towers all around me. And there were people, men and women, in those towers, and they were all yelling at people below about being safe and avoiding the fire, but they were also dealing with the trucks that were coming towards the towers. So what's surprising about this is that there's thousands of other watchmen like this. I'd like to know who they are. On YouTube, there are far more false prophets than people like Dana Coverstone, who is giving true prophecy. I don't know any, well, there might be a few other Catholic prophets out there. But anyway, you can tell which ones are true because they warn you about the hierarchy in the church. And they tell you that you have to pray Mary's rosary. There are some. I don't know if there's thousands. Maybe there are. If you count all the evangelicals and the Catholics, there may be 1,000. I hope he's right. All right, let's look at the next slide, next part of Dana's dream. Each truck backed up a little bit, trying to get speed to hit the towers as well. So all of a sudden, we hear the trucks start revving up. They're revving their engines, and a soldier that held a lit flare ready to throw, he threw it in the back of the trailer, and those trucks exploded in flame. And this happened all around me, as I saw literally thousands of fire towers. That same precise moment, all of us in the towers, the men, the women, myself, we made fists. We put our hands straight up in the air, and we yelled as loud as we could, "Until he comes, until he comes." So this Dana is telling us, me particularly, and himself, that we have to continue on the watchtower until Jesus returns. We are in that phase of human existence. What Dana's talking about is an end times prophecy. These are the people who will be martyred through the fires, by the fires, but they go to heaven because they knew enough not to take the mark of the beast. But they don't listen to the prophets, and all you have to do is ask a Catholic if most of them are loyal to Pope Francis, which is an error. because they don't listen to what Mary said at La Salette. Therefore, they are good people, as the Bible says. They're going to wear white, and they're going to have palms in their hands when they get to heaven. But they are not going to survive into the millennium. To survive into the millennium, they have to have a refuge. None of these people have found a refuge, except the one kid, the teen, who moved 50 feet out of the path that he was on. That's what he's got to do. The 50 feet represents Mary's rosary. So he found safety through that number, that numerological number, which symbolizes, as I say, Mary's rosary. Okay, let's look at the next slide. And now those trucks are revving those engines. They're on fire in the back, so to speak. And each of us in the towers went back to yelling at people. Those trucks were revving their engines, but we're yelling at people to watch what's going on. And the soldiers shouted back to us. They were telling the people, there's no fire, they're lying. And those soldiers shouted back and said, now we bring the fire to you. And there were explosions all over the area as they moved those trucks approaching as quickly as they could. Now this is believable. The hierarchy is going to not only teach something completely different than what the prophets are saying, they're going to try to stop the prophets. They're going to back these fire trucks into the tower. And if you don't believe they can't do that, what happened to Melanie Calvat, the seer of La Salette? She was exiled from her own country by the church. They forced her out of France. She died in Italy. And as I said, look what they did to Sister Lucy. We don't know what they did to Sister Lucy. So this is going on right now. And it's only getting worse, as we all know, because now the false prophet has taken over the Vatican. And as Mary prophesied, Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. Okay, let's look at the next slide from Dana's vision, or dream, I should say. Your young men shall have visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. And those of us in the towers, we put our arms around the metal in front of us, and we just held on, but we kept yelling. While we held on the tower, we kept yelling at people below us to not run towards the fire, to go left, to go right, go north, go south. And when the trucks hit those towers all around me, there was a sonic boom, and the towers shook very, very, very badly, but they did not go down. And they backed up as they continued to yell at the people in our area of influence. And the next slide. And then they came speeding forward again to hit the tower, the feet of the tower, and this time the towers moved more than before, and the ground around it caught fire, as well as the trailers tipped over, and they wedged the trucks against the tower feet. And those in the towers, we kept yelling down at people, and now we're yelling at the drivers of the trucks, who were trapped, telling them to get out. The fire was spreading around them. And the next slide. Several of those trucks I could hear explode. One exploded at my feet, and it killed the driver inside. But one of those drivers was trying to get his way out, and I kept going, go to the right, jump off the truck, and go right. He looked back and he said, I'm sorry. But they still did not listen to us about where they were running, and they ran into the fire as well, so they ended up getting killed. So as I say, these are good people. The truck driver, he's going to go to heaven. He's going to wear a white robe. He's going to have a palm. But because he's misled by the soldiers are misleading him. Unless they move 50 feet. Like I said, if they move 50 feet, if they take up the rosary, then they can be protected. But as you can see, the huge number, the vast number of people are not going to. They're going to continue following the hierarchy. And that's why both John in the book of Revelation and Dana here in the fire tower dream see a large number of people, a huge number. It's the same group. Dana sees them before as they are in the tribulation and before they go to heaven. John sees them in the book of Revelation after they go to heaven. And they have a glorious destiny. They're faithful to their hierarchy, but they're not going to survive into the millennium. To do that, they have to take up Mary's rosary and scapula. Okay, let's see. What slide are we up to here? I think this is the right one. Those of us in the tower, we warned some of those that were bursting into flames right when they hit. It seemed like an invisible wall of fire. They could not see, but we could. Some did get very warm and turned back. Some felt the heat, but they seemed confused, and they kept going forward until they too burst into flames. A few thanked those of us up on the tower with tears in their eyes, and they ran to safety. And those in the towers kept warning others and screaming. So we do see that a few are going to run to safety, and we know what that means. They are going to run 50 feet away. They're going to take up the rosary. So if your family members who know enough not to take the mark of the beast, I mean, that's a given, and they're living in the desert, that is, they're heading towards the fire, and they don't have food because the black horse is riding, and the fires from, I guess, meteors or comets, that's what I believe, could be nuclear fires. They can protect themselves, just like the family was protected at Hiroshima. With a nuclear blast, they lived within 6 feet of ground zero, 6 feet, 6 blocks of ground zero. But they prayed the rosary. Dana is actually telling us to pray the rosary, even though he's evangelical. But that's why I'm here to interpret it, so that we Catholics understand that the Holy Spirit is talking through Dana, to his people and to the Catholic Church. Let me see. So I'm now ready for the next slide, I think. Where am I here? Did I do it? Oh, here we are. Some of us were hoarse from yelling so loud, and some were so tired we simply whispered, because that was all that we could do from all the yelling we were doing to try to get people to realize how dangerous it was. And suddenly the noise, the fire, the flames, the explosions, all the yelling had just stopped. Everything got brutally silent, and the clouds got very white in front of us, right in front of our eyes. And it got very, very transparent, and everything lit up like lightning and flashed. It did not go out. So now we're going to see the admonition from the man in white to those of us on the top of the towers. Let me read that slide. I then heard the voice of the man that I see so often in the dreams, and he spoke out of that cloud, and he said, "Keep warning the church." And then he said it again, only louder, "Keep warning the church." And then he said it one more time, even louder, "Keep warning the church." So what does that mean? Well, it's obvious, as Dana understood, and of course I understand, we have to keep warning the church on the top of the towers. But it also means that my interpretation of who those people are is correct. They are the church. All those people on the ground. They represent the church. And they are going in the wrong direction. And I think that is the message. The people they will go to heaven. They will even be awarded white robes. They'll have palms in their hands. But they are misguided into that, to not surviving into the millennium. And that is the message, I believe, of this prophecy. So now let's look at the next slide. This is the last slide of Dana's dream. And in that instance, the lightness, that light disappeared, and the darkness returned. And I saw the fire on the canopy below me. I saw that all the other people in the tower started yelling again at those below, even while the towers on which they sat were being attacked and moving. So we just kept doing what we were doing, and we warned the church with even greater intensity. So I mentioned Sister Lucy before, who was replaced by the Vatican by an impostor, and that's because she was giving true prophecy. The last interview she gave, she said the consecration of Russia had not been done. I think the Vatican decided at that time they had to remove her because she was undermining the official Vatican position. And the Vatican position was that Pope John Paul II, although they removed her before then, John Paul II, quite a few of the popes had attempted consecration, and Pope John Paul II did. And one of the things Sister Lucy said in the Third Secret of Fatima was, in Portugal, the dogma of the faith will always be preserved. The most important dogma of the faith is the dogma of the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. And Pope Francis has succeeded in bringing about the abomination of desolation. The Eucharist is no longer valid in many places. Now, Sister Lucy predicts that Portugal would keep the dogma of the faith. We have discovered that Poland is keeping the dogma of the faith because they have not gone along with Pope Francis. To have a valid Eucharist, you must use the same words that Jesus used. You must use the same matter that Jesus used. You must have the same intention that Jesus had. That is, you must intend to consecrate the bread and the wine into his body and blood. The first two requirements, you can tell if a priest is using the wrong words. You'll say, this Eucharist is not valid. I'm not going to receive this Eucharist. Priests or bishops, and even the Pope is smart enough not to try to change that, because you can tell. Same way with the matter. If he tries to consecrate strawberry shortcake or chocolate chip cookie, you would know it right away. But you don't know the intentions of the priest. That's the third requirement for a valid Eucharist. That's why the Church teaches that it is not the priest who determines the validity of the Eucharist. The intention is determined by the Church. But what if the Church loses the faith and becomes the seat of the Antichrist? What if the Pope changes the Roman Catholic Church into the one world religion? You have to do exactly what the bishops in Poland did. You have to renounce the promulgation that Pope Francis put out in his apostolic exhortation, Amoris Laetitia, footnote 351. You have to do exactly what the Polish bishops announced publicly. They said, we are not going to give communion to people living in mortal sin. We are not going to give communion to divorced and civilly remarried Catholics. Thus, they maintain the legitimate Eucharist in Poland. Many other countries, they have not. Malta, they said anyone and everyone may receive communion in Malta. That ruins the intention. The two intentions, the intention to consecrate the body and the blood of our Lord, and the intention to give communion to people living in mortal sin, those are incompatible. It's impossible. It's an impossibility. You cannot have those two intentions at the same time. And that's what. And therefore, in Malta, those consecrations are invalid. And how about this country? Well, let me show you what. I found this picture on the internet. Here's the bishops of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Now, do you think these people are going to preserve the dogma of the faith? Michael Forrest shows pictures like this of these people have lost the faith. You can just look at them. And these are American bishops. So where does that leave the rest of us? The only thing I can recommend is that you go to my website and look at the prayer that Sister Renee published on there, a prayer of discernment to find out if your priest is giving valid Eucharists. If his intention is to follow Pope Francis in the one world religion and give communion to people living in mortal sin, his consecrations are not valid. And he has to publicly state that he is not going to give communion, that he is not going to follow Pope Francis, just like the bishops in Poland did. Those of you who do receive communion in these churches, you are going to be like the people in Dana who head towards the fire, and you refuse to listen to the prophets. And most of you are good people. I know my brother's in that category. He poo-poos the idea of prophecy, telling him that consecrations are invalid. And, as Dana says, what else can we do? He is going to keep yelling, and I'm going to keep yelling at the top of my voice until he comes. So Dana is 100% right. It's an amazing prophecy that he received, amazing dream. And that is my interpretation. Okay, so that is the end of Dana's dream, and I have to leave pretty. Oh my goodness, I'm a little too. I didn't mean to go this late. And the reason is because John Larry is starting a Zoom conference, which I told everyone about this morning. He started a few minutes ago. So if those of you who want to leave for the Zoom conference, I can certainly understand that. But for those of you who want to stick around, I will take a look at the chat and see what people would like to talk about here. Well, let me see. It seems to me I have sound of people saying that it didn't work out. So, Woody Roses for BVM says, Mr. T, if you see these messages, I know you don't post, but please let us know that you're okay. We're all worried. So I can see we have trolls, but so are you saying that this program did not air? To me, everything looks okay. The sound looks okay. And people in the chat are saying it's not okay. Well, all I can say is that in that case, I'm going to. It looks like we have a lot of trolls out here today. That's no problem. Huh. Well, I could check the phone. I don't know. I'm going to cancel, say goodbye to everybody. It looks like we have a problem. So until I do see all of you again, may God bless all of you, and may all of you have a very blessed evening.